Welcome to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety, where we talk about the real issues out on the road, focus on safe driving, and learn industry best practices from your hosts Kenny Ray, Mike Bohan, Jim Seibert, and Barry Harrison, and the hopes that by driving the line, we get more drivers home safe and sound. This podcast is made possible by Marsh McLennan Agency.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the latest episode of Driving the Line, the podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety. This is Kenny Ray, and I've got it solo today. Mike and Jim and Barry are all off on different assignments, and I'm going to visit with you a little bit today about how to successfully DataQ a crash. I know our audience is a trucking audience, and I have been in this industry almost 40 years, and the ability to DataQ a crash through the FMCSA portal is one of the most significant positive changes I have seen in my entire career from an administrative standpoint, assisting and helping motor carriers. We have never, ever in the past, ever had the ability to challenge data that FMCSA puts in the portal. And after much significant amounts of complaints, both directly from motor carriers to the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, as well as pressure put on members of Congress several years ago, we're now about 5 years into this program, but FMCSA created a way for a motor carrier to go in and challenge or issue what is called a determination of preventability for a crash that appears in the FMCSA portal. And what I want to do today is just give you some very practical, very pragmatic tips of how to be successful with that process, how to achieve the result that you want to achieve when you go in and DataQ a crash. So that's what we're going to visit with about today. Now, before we start talking about the actual steps to challenge a crash within the FMCSA Crash Preventability Determination Program, there are a couple other times that you may need to DataQ a crash for a reason other than seeking a preventability determination. And on those, you still DataQ the crash, but it's an entirely different process. Your goal is different. One of the classic ones, you go into the portal and you look and there's a crash in there and it's not yours. It simply doesn't belong to you, and yet it's showing up on your portal. Well, how does that happen? A couple of reasons. The most common one, and this one is not nefarious at all, no ill intent whatsoever, but the investigator that investigated the crash sometimes make a data entry on your USDOT number. They can be off one digit, or they may switch two digits. And what ends up happening is a crash shows up that's not even yours. Your truck wasn't even there. And on those, you can go in and DataQ to get that completely removed. The other time that you may want to DataQ a crash, other than seeking a preventability determination, is if there's erroneous information on the accident report, on the crash report itself. Sometimes on some of these truck accidents, particularly if there's multiple vehicles involved, if you've got 4 or 5 vehicles on an interstate and you've got 4 or 5 drivers and you got maybe more than one tractor trailer rig, so you start looking at the units, and the trooper or the investigator is numbering those units, and let's say your truck is numbered as unit 3 and your trailer is unit 4, and then there's 6 or 7 vehicles involved, 4 or 5 different drivers. Every once in a while, when they get down to the narrative, sometimes unit numbers will be switched in the narrative, or you'll look and they have your tractor and your trailer listed and all of your company information, but you look at the driver's information, you say, well, that's not my driver. And then you realize that the trooper was there on the side of the road and had 4 or 5 driver's licenses in his hands, and he or she's completing their crash report, and they just made a clerical error, if you will. There are times that we will DataQ that just because we want the crash report to be accurate. And sometimes, and the reason I'm spending a little bit of time on this, talking about correcting errors before we start talking about crash preventability, is because you don't want to try to challenge a crash through the preventability determination program if the information on the accident report is not correct. So sometimes we have to correct errors on the accident report prior to submitting it for preventability determination. So we want the crash report to be accurate before we try to challenge it through preventability. Because if it's not, and the person that is trying to make the determination on preventability reads the narrative and the unit numbers have been switched, they may not come to the same conclusion we have come to about whether or not that crash was actually non-preventable. So my point is, if there's errors on the crash report itself, we must fix those before we start trying to submit a challenge to get a crash preventability determination. Okay? So what does it matter? Why should we even care if we should go in and challenge one of these crashes? Well, I want to tell you, there's some positive benefits for a motor carrier to receive a non-preventable crash determination from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. So what are some of those benefits? Well, first of all, and this is a common misconception in our industry, just because you're successful challenging a crash through the crash preventability determination program does not mean that FMCSA is going to remove the crash from your profile. They will not. The crash will still be on your profile. They put it there, and they have been challenged about that, and so far Congress and the courts have backed them on their reasoning, because their reasoning is they are collecting crash data. And so if the crash is legitimately yours, if your truck and trailer and your driver was there and they were involved in an accident, it is going to be on your profile if it meets the definition of a FMCSA reportable accident. It's going to be on your profile. And even having a successful determination through the crash preventability determination program will not get the crash removed off your profile. What it does do for you, and this is a huge benefit to a trucking company, it basically removes any CSA consequences associated with that crash. The crash will not be used to calculate your percentile in the crash basic within CSA. It will not be used on an audit or a compliance review to calculate your crash rate, which is found in Factor 6 of the audit. And y'all know what that is. That's where they take the number of crashes over the past 12 months, they multiply those by 1 million, and they divide it by your actual mileage. And whatever that ratio comes out, it must be below a 1.5, or you're going to get at best a conditional crash rating on Factor 6 of the audit. But if you're successful in getting a non-preventable determination through this program, that particular crash, or those crashes, if you're successful with multiple challenges, will not be used by an auditor in calculating your crash rate on a compliance review. A benefit for the driver, they also will show that the crash was non-preventable on that driver's PSP, which drivers love that. Now most truck drivers they'll use the term, you'll hear them say, it wasn't my fault, I wasn't at fault. And I even hear motor carrier officials say, we weren't at fault in this crash. Remember, what we're trying to determine is whether or not this crash was preventable, not whether or not you were at fault. And so what the goal is for us to get the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration to issue a determination that this crash was non-preventable. And if they do that, again, for the driver, it shows up as non-preventable on his or her PSP report. Another huge benefit for a motor carrier, think about this, let this sink in. I'm not trying to be dramatic, but this is a big deal. This is a public declaration by the United States government, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, that this crash, from the perspective of the trucking company, was not preventable. Think about that. That is a stamp, if you will, from the U.S. government that says this trucking company, not only were they not at fault, they couldn't do anything to keep this crash from happening. It simply was not preventable. And where that will aid you the most is if you're ever involved in litigation. It is just a huge benefit to an attorney that's representing you if you're involved in a lawsuit. Other benefits, it may help your insurance broker negotiate for more favorable insurance rates for you. And purely from an operational standpoint, I know that a lot of trucking companies tell me that one benefit for them of getting these crashes ruled as non-preventable, which in turn lowers their CSA score in the crash basic, it helps them in contractual negotiations with their clients. Some of their clients demand that the trucking companies that haul for them be what they call best in class. And one of the best in class criteria, or one of the metrics, if you will, that these customers use is they look at that crash rate or that crash basic in CSA for these trucking companies. So if you have a crash and you get it ruled as non-preventable, it takes away the consequences of those CSA points and helps lower that crash basic, which in turn can help you get better rates when you're negotiating with your clients. So I tell you that, Terry, there's a lot of benefits for you doing this if you're successful at it, okay? All right, now, before we start talking about the actual steps, there are some things that you're going to need to do as a motor carrier, whether that's the safety director that does this, whether it is your risk people that do it for your company. If you're a small trucking company, it may be the owner of the company that does this. But there's some things you need to get together or have access to before you even start the process. The first one is you've got to have your own login credentials to get into the FMCSA portal. And then once you're able to get into the portal, you have to have internal approval from your company for you to be able to access the DataQ part of the portal. I'm absolutely amazed that there are still trucking companies that do not have login credentials to the portal. Ladies and gentlemen that listen to this, if you own a trucking company, you're the safety director of the trucking company, you're the chief operating person at a trucking company, you need to be able to get into that FMCSA portal. That is where all of the data on your company that is maintained by the federal government is housed. And you need to be able to get in there and see what they have. Because if there's errors in there, there are mechanisms in place for you to correct that. You can't even start that process if you cannot get in, first of all, to the portal. Then once you're in, somebody from your company, and it's normally the very first person that receives the login credentials. And I want to spend a couple of minutes on this because we see an issue with this over and over. Somebody will get the login credentials, and whoever the very first person is that does that for the company, FMCSA considers that person the company administrator, okay? Then anybody else that wants credentials or anybody else that wants permission to do certain things within the portal, basically FMCSA sends an email to that person who's been designated as the administrator and says, hey, Kenny Ray is trying to get approval to be the DataQ person for your company. Do you grant that approval? And until that administrator for the company says, yes, Kenny Ray's allowed to do DataQs on my behalf, they will not give me or you, whoever's trying to get that permission, ability to get into the DataQ. Now, where this causes a problem is if you had somebody that originally obtained the FMCSA login credentials and that person is no longer with the company. They left, and their email account is no longer being monitored or answered or whatever. So basically, y'all do have a portal account, but nobody can get in it because the person who could grant permission to let other people in the company get into the portal is no longer there to grant that permission, okay? And so my suggestion for that, the easiest thing to do to fix that is to call the FMCSA portal help desk, and that's an easy number to find on the FMCSA website, but call the help desk and explain what I just said. Say, hey, we're a trucking company. Somebody got our login credentials 3 or 4, 5, 6 years ago, and they're no longer with the company, and we don't know how to get in. Will you help us with that? And they will help you set up a new account, a new administrator. It's not an instantaneous process because they're going to end up sending you a PIN number, and they still do this by U.S. mail. So you're going to get a PIN number that will come several days after you get their help on the help desk. But once you get that PIN number, then you can go in, establish who the administrator is, and then that person can give permission for whoever's going to do the DataQs at your company. So that has to be done before you start anything, or you can't even get into the system. All right, the next thing you need before you start, you're going to have a copy of the police accident report, the crash report. And depending on the state where the crash occurred, you're going to probably need their state code sheet. What I mean by that, these crash reports now contain so much data that what they do is they end up assigning codes to certain things. And if you don't have that code sheet, you'll have no idea what code 19 is or code 28 is. It'll just list on there, factors that were involved in the accident, and it may say 19, 28, and 39. Well, if you don't have the code sheet, you have no idea what those numbers mean. And some of these code sheets are pretty complex. I'm down in the state of Texas. If you print ours, it's front and back of a piece of regular typing paper, and it's full. I mean, there literally are hundreds of codes listed on that thing, and they do that just for the sake of space, because if they had to type out every one of those things, accident reports would be 10, 12, 14, 15 pages long. So for the sake of efficiency, they use codes for various things, and you basically have to have that code sheet to be able to determine what it is they're saying about your crash, okay? So very first of all, get your login credentials to the FMCSA portal, then make sure you have approval through your administrator to be the person that submits the DataQs. Then you've got to have a copy of the crash report, and every state has a procedure for how to obtain that. Most of them you can get them online now. Some of them are free. Some of them there's a small fee for getting them. And you need that code sheet so you can understand what all the codes mean on that crash report. Then there's two documents that I want to encourage you, even all of you that are very digitally savvy and that you're comfortable working with documents purely on the screen of your laptop or your computer at the office. There's two documents I want to encourage you to print. And I want to encourage you to print them in color, and preferably just on one side of a piece of paper, okay? And I'll tell you why I request or suggest that you do that. The first one is the submitter's guide from the FMCSA Crash Preventability Determination Program. So you just get on whatever search engine you use, and you type in FMCSA Crash Preventability Determination Program and click on it. And there is a very easy, very friendly, user-friendly website that'll pop up. And it is actually the website of the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, Crash Preventability Determination Program. If you look over to the left and near the top of that page, the home page, there are two documents that are listed as PDFs. One of them is the submitter's guide, and that is a document that basically walks you step by step through the process of how to actually submit a DataQ for crash preventability determination. It is a very, very helpful document. So I encourage you to print that and just have it there at your desk anytime you're going to do one of these DataQs, and it helps refresh your memory of how to do the actual steps. The other one is what is called the eligibility guide, and it lists the types of crashes, and we're now up to 21. It lists the types of crashes that you actually can submit through this program. You can't submit all of them, okay? There's some of them that does not fit their criteria, and they won't allow you to challenge those, okay? Well, this eligibility guide will tell you what those are, the different types of crashes. And that document is critically important because not only does it tell you the types of crashes that you can challenge, it gives you specific examples through words of what meets that criteria. And the reason that is important is because once you start actually submitting to get a crash reviewed through the crash preventability determination program, there is a spot in there for you to use narrative. You want to actually use their words that come directly off of their eligibility guide. The reason for that is that eligibility guide is what their reviewers use to determine whether or not your crash meets their criteria. So that their reviewers have been trained on that document. They have it right there at their desk whenever they're reviewing a crash. So it's advantageous for us to use their exact language so that when that person is looking and reading through your narrative, they say, oh, this does meet our criteria. And it's the fact that we're using their language. So I would encourage you to actually physically print those two documents, the submitter's guide, which again tells you how to submit, and the eligibility guide, which again tells you what can be submitted. And then the final thing you will need before you start is any dash cam video, if you have it and if it's applicable to your submission, okay? So again, before you start, you need login credentials to get into the portal. You need approval to be the person that does DataQs at your company. You need a copy of the police accident report and the state code sheet from whatever state where the crash occurred. You need to print and have next to your desk or on your desk your submitter's guide and the eligibility guide, and you need to have access to the dash cam video if it is available, okay? So those are all things we do before we even start. Now, one other thing we're going to do before we actually start trying to submit a challenge through the crash preventability determination program, we are going to go over with a fine-tooth comb and review that police accident report, the crash report, okay? We are going to read it thoroughly. We're not going to just give a cursory glance at it. We first of all want to check it for accuracy. Do they have our driver properly identified? Do they have our vehicle properly identified? We're going to read through the narrative multiple times. We're going to look at the diagram. We're going to compare how they numbered our vehicle. And if you're talking about a tractor trailer rig, both the tractor gets a unit number assigned to it and the trailer gets a unit number assigned to it. We're going to make sure whatever unit numbers are assigned to our vehicle in the informational part of the report matches what is in the narrative and on the diagram. That is where things get confusing sometimes. Again, particularly depending on the complexity of the crash. If it occurs on the interstate and there's multiple commercial vehicles involved, 2 or 3 tractor trailer rigs and maybe 2 or 3 four-wheelers, you know, you're talking about 6, 7, 8 different unit numbers on there, and it is very easy for numbers to get switched around. And even though the diagram may be correct, the narrative may be wrong. It may be that our truck was going down the interstate and a car or another truck came off of an entrance ramp onto the interstate and slammed into the side of our truck. But when you look at or you read the narrative, they switch the units around, and it makes it sound like our truck came down the entrance ramp and slammed into the side of the car, even though that's not what happened. So we want to make sure, first of all, the crash report is accurate. And I can't tell you how important this is, and probably even get multiple set of eyes to look at it. You know, if you're the safety director, get somebody on your team. Hey, read this. Does this make sense? Or go, if you're the owner of a trucking company, go to whoever wears the safety hat. Or if you've got a consultant, or if you're one of our clients, you call me, Barry, or Mike and say, hey, would you read this and see what you think about this? And just get multiple eyes to look at it to make sure the crash report is accurate, okay? So the next thing we're going to do after we determine that the report is accurate, we're going to read that narrative and look at the diagram very carefully and determine, did the investigator assign any fault? Can you read this and come to a conclusion that they think this is a little bit our fault? Kind of the words they're using in here doesn't give me a warm fuzzy. If there's any assigned fault in the narrative or the diagram, we're not going to challenge. We're simply not going to submit this crash, and I'll explain more about that here in just a second. And then the biggie, in fact, most of the time, this is the very first place I go. Somewhere on that accident report, somewhere in all of those codes, there's going to be a box or a series of boxes that are going to be titled contributing factors. Contributing factors. And those are things in the investigator's opinion, okay, that contributed to this crash. And so when I look at those contributing factors, I always look and see, did they assign any contributing factors to my driver? Any at all, okay? If it's blank, they didn't put any factors at all, that's good for us. There are some states that actually have a code that the code means no factors. So I saw one time. I looked at it, and there was a code in there for our driver, and my immediate thought was, we can't challenge this one. In the investigator's opinion, our driver had some contributing factor to this. But then I took that code sheet. This is why the code sheet's so important. And I looked, and that particular number in that particular state meant no factors. Okay, so that particular state requires their investigators to put something in every box. Some states allow the box just to remain blank. So if it's our driver under the field of contributing factors, we want either no contributing factors, or if they put one, it's got to be that one that says no factors or no contributing factors, okay? Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't hear anything else from this podcast, please hear this. Do not, under any circumstances, submit a crash for review through the Crash Preventability Determination Program if there's any chance whatsoever that FMCSA will rule this crash as preventable, okay? That is the kiss of death for you. Because just like I mentioned earlier, the advantages for you, the benefits for you, if they rule something non-preventable, the absolute opposite is true as well if they rule it preventable. Think about that. You submit a crash, and FMCSA comes back and says, you know what? You could have prevented this. This crash didn't have to happen. And then they put that on their public website. That there's no way for us to overcome that, okay? And that goes back to a fundamental discussion and something so important for you to understand. Preventability and fault are not the same thing. Listen to me very carefully, please. Preventability and fault are not the same thing. A preventable accident is one in which a driver failed to take reasonable action to avoid the accident, even if that driver was not legally at fault. I want to encourage you to get on your favorite search engine and type in National Safety Council, which is a nonprofit organization that has one agenda and one agenda only, and that's safety. Get on there and type in National Safety Council definition of a preventable accident, and you'll bring it up, and you will see very clearly that preventability and fault are not the same thing. In fact, preventability is a higher standard than fault. What I mean by that is your driver may not legally be at fault, which means he or she didn't break any laws. They're not going to get a ticket out of this, okay? But let's use the example of a tractor-trailer rig in the outside lane of an interstate, going down an interstate, and there's an entrance ramp coming in. And that truck driver, that professional truck driver, clearly sees there's a car, a four-wheeler, coming down that entrance ramp onto the interstate, okay? And the truck driver can clearly see, if I keep my current speed and I stay in this lane and that car doesn't brake, that car is going to run into the side of me, okay? Now, let's say that driver maintains the lane he or she is in, and they maintain the speed they're in, so they have a legal right to be in that lane. They have a legal right to be driving the speed they are, as long as they're not exceeding the speed limit, and that car runs into the side of them, okay? But when that accident is being investigated, the trooper asked the driver, well, what happened? He said, well, I was driving down the interstate, and I saw that car coming down, and I knew he was going to run inside of me, but I don't know why he didn't brake, okay? That was a completely preventable crash. Was our driver legally at fault? No. Our driver had a right to be in that lane. Our driver was driving below the posted speed limit. Our driver wasn't doing anything wrong, but the crash was preventable. Our driver could have braked and slowed down and let that car get in front of it. If the lane to the left was open, our driver could have given a turn signal, moved over one lane, and let that car come in. So even though our driver wasn't at fault, the crash was preventable. And that is what FMCSA is going to determine through this program. Not fault or no fault, but was it preventable or not preventable, okay? So again, let me repeat, if there is any chance whatsoever that FMCSA will rule your crash as preventable, I want to encourage you, do not submit it, okay? The only ones we want to submit are ones we're absolutely confident that we will win, okay? Now, the date on which your crash occurred is important because on December 1st of 2024, last year, December 1st of 2024, the submission criteria changed. They opened it up. FMCSA opened it up and let more types of crashes be submitted. But if your crash occurred prior to December 1st of 2024, it will be evaluated under the old criteria. If it occurred on December 1st, 2024 and moving forward, it will be evaluated on the new criteria that's in effect now. And the new criteria is we basically have 21 different types of crashes. So they're constantly expanding the number of types of crashes they'll look at. But the most significant change was that they now will review any crash if it's supported by video evidence, okay? So if you've got dash cam evidence that supports your contention that this was a non-preventable crash, they will review it whether it fits one of the other criteria or not. So if you've got video, they always will review your crash, okay? So what are the steps? What do you actually do? Well, here they are, and they're really not very complex. You first log into the FMCSA portal, and you go to the part of the portal that allows you to submit DataQs, okay? And then there'll be several tabs or boxes pop up, and one of them will say that you want to submit a crash for review through the Crash Preventability Determination Program, okay? So when you do that, you click into that, that gets you into the part of the DataQ system that allows you to challenge these crashes in terms of their preventability or not preventability, okay? So that's where you want to end up. So once you're to the right place, you will find your crash or crashes, if there's multiple ones, listed in the portal. They'll just have them there. And you click on the one that you're wanting to challenge. And when you click on that one that you're wanting to challenge, it'll open up multiple boxes, and many of them will already be populated. It'll have the date of the crash, where it occurred. It'll already have the information about your vehicle. It'll have the information about your driver. But you want to look at all those fields that they automatically populate and make sure they're correct. And then if there's any missing fields, and for whatever reason, one of the ones that oftentimes does not pre-populate is your USDOT number. So you want to fill that out. Now, all of my friends that know me and my co-host on the podcast know I am not a technology guy. It's mainly a function of my age and my generation. I'm just not a technology guy. But I will tell you this, whoever set this system up, it's fairly intuitive once you get in it, okay? So if you end up in the right place, in the part of the DataQ portal that will allow you to DataQ crashes through the Preventability Determination Program, it's basically just walking down through a series of boxes and making sure all the information is correct. I have done many of these, a bunch of them, and if I can do them, anybody listening to this podcast can do them. I promise you that. So it's fairly intuitive once you get into the system. Now, to me, the most important part of it, bar none, is when you get to the narrative. And basically, FMCSA lets you just free type your reasons why you think this crash ought to be ruled as non-preventable. And I want you to think about this, because in my opinion, this is the most important step, bar none. There's going to be a person that works for FMCSA that is going to review your accident report. They're going to look at your video, if you have video, and then they're going to read this narrative that you're submitting. And what you're wanting them to do is to reach the identical same conclusion that you have reached, and that is that your crash was non-preventable. So I want you to think about taking tiny baby steps, okay? And each of those tiny baby steps is a detail within this narrative. I encourage people to actually number their sentences almost like bullets. And I start at the very, very basic. Like my very first bullet or my very first number one is always this. This crash occurred in Harris County, Texas on this date. Okay. So I'm just laying out where it occurred. This crash involved driver Kenny Ray. This crash involved a truck, tractor, semi-trailer identified by Texas license plate. I am very, very detailed because I want them to read step by step by step so that when they get to the end, they sit and say, this crash was non-preventable. There was nothing that driver could have done to keep this from happening. That's the goal for us, for that person reviewing this to reach that conclusion. So I'm going to walk them very detailed, step by step by step, so that they can not come to any conclusion other than the one that I have already reached. Okay, so that's our goal. Now, once you're through with the narrative, you have to upload a copy of the police accident report. That's normally a PDF, plus any other supporting documentation you have. If it was a fatality, you absolutely must upload drug and alcohol test results. If there were witness statements, you can upload those as PDFs. If you have photos that support your contention, you can upload those, and there's various formats. JPEG's the most common one, okay? But within that submitter's guide, they list all the acceptable formats that you can use to submit photos and video. And if you have video, it's available and it's applicable to your crash. You can upload that. The file size is limited to 25 megabytes, 25 MBs, okay? And again, the acceptable formats are listed in the submitter's guide. Now, if your video is larger than that, there's actually a FMCSA has an email address that goes directly to the folks that review crashes through the Crash Preventability Determination Program, and you can submit your video through email. Now, once you've done everything before you hit the submit button, you want to review and double check. Folks, this is too important, okay, to mess up. So double check, put another set of eyes on it, let folks look at it before you hit that submit button. Because once it's gone, okay, then it's in their wheelhouse. And let me tell you what they're going to do, and then I'm going to wrap this up. The very first thing, once your submission arrives at FMCSA, the very first thing they're going to do is determine, is it even eligible for review? Does it meet their criteria for them to review? If it's not, this one doesn't really hurt you, but they're just basically going to say this crash is not eligible for review. They'll send you back an email and they'll tell you it doesn't meet their criteria. You can't submit it, okay? If it is eligible, they tell you that they'll have results back to you in about 90 days. I've seen some come back the same month that they submit them. There's no rhyme or reason for this. I've seen other one take 6 to 9 months to get the results back. But it normally takes a minimum of 90 days. Let that sink in. That's 3 months. You're not going to submit one in the morning of a day and get it back that afternoon. That's just not going to happen, okay? They just have way too many of them coming in, and they don't have near enough people that are doing the reviews. But let's say it meets their criteria and they review it. They are going to issue a determination of one of 3 things. They're either going to say this crash, in their opinion, was non-preventable. That's what we want. The other 2 are not good for us, the other 2 rulings. They can rule them preventable, which means they believe there's something our driver could have done to keep this from happening. And the third one is, I don't see this often, but they're allowed to do this. They can issue a ruling of being undecided, which means your crash met the criteria for them to review it, but they couldn't determine yay or nay whether it was preventable or non-preventable. In my opinion, that's not a good ruling for us, okay? That's why I go back and say, if you're not absolutely certain you're going to win, I encourage you don't submit, okay? If there's any chance whatsoever that they're going to rule your crash as preventable, you do not want to submit. Now, Periodically, FMCSA will say, hey, we need a little more information. They'll send you an email and ask you for some other things, okay? If they do that, you've got 14 days to respond to their request. And then, let's say, heaven forbid, they issue either a preventable or an undecided ruling on your crash. You can, if you come up with new information that supports your position, you can resubmit a DataQ. Those are fairly rare, primarily because every person I talk to that I possibly can, I tell them, don't submit if you're not absolutely confident you're going to win. The consequences are just too great. We just don't want the federal government telling the world that, hey, this crash was preventable. And that's just the kiss of death for us, okay? So the steps are fairly easy. Log into the portal, get on the DataQ site, find your crash, check all the fields, make sure they're properly filled in. Be very detailed in the narrative. Our goal is to lead that FMCSA reviewer to the same conclusion we have reached. We do that by very detailed step by step. You then upload the police accident report, any other supporting documents you have, including drug and alcohol tests, witness statements, photos, video if you have it, and then give it a thorough review, and then hits the submit button. Now, I want to close and leave you with a word of encouragement. Of the ones that are being submitted for review, for the crashes that are being submitted for review, motor carriers are being so careful about, number one, submitting crashes that clearly were non-preventable, and they're doing a really good job on that narrative portion to where the overwhelming majority of these that end up being eligible for the program are being ruled as non-preventable in favor of the motor carrier. So the number of ones that you can actually challenge is probably relatively low, but if you have one, it's critically important for you to do it. And just know that the majority of them are being reviewed and being found in favor of the motor carrier. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap up our discussion today about how to successfully DataQ a crash through the FMCSA Crash Preventability Determination Program. And if you have additional questions about this, particularly if you're one of our clients, you can reach out to me or Mike or Barry. We're the three truck guys out of the four of us that are on the podcast. And if not, reach out to your trusted safety professional, whoever gives you safety advice about truck-related things, and talk to them about whether or not a crash you have is eligible and should be submitted for a non-preventable determination through this program. So this is Kenny Ray. Thank you for your time today. And we will discuss additional things tied to this at some point in the future, particularly those things about clearing up errors on crashes and how to do that. That's a whole different submission process. And I'll make a pledge to you that at some point in the future, we'll do an episode just on that, about how to DataQ things other than through the Crash Preventability Determination Program. So for my co-host, Mike Bohan, Jim Seibert, and Mr. Barry Harrison, this is Kenny Ray saying so long, and y'all be safe out there. And remember, tune in and join us on Driving the Line, the podcast that is always in the pursuit of safety.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety. We hope you enjoyed our discussion, and thank you for listening. You can rate, review, and subscribe to Driving the Line, the pursuit of safety on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, or any other app you're using. You can also follow Marsh McLennan Agency on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Until the next time, thanks again for listening. Drive safely, everyone.